The Fundamental Attribution Error by Gina Basha, Ben Kelser, and Jared Lynn. An attribution is the way a person explains certain events and actions. There are two types of attributions: personal attributions and situational attributions. Personal attributions are explanations of people's actions as a result of their inherent personality or characteristics. Situational attributions are explanations of behaviors as a result of external and situational factors. The fundamental attribution error is a bias that occurs when people emphasize personal attributions when explaining other people's behaviors, but focus on situational attributions when explaining their own behavior. For example, when someone else is late, we tend to think that they are lazy or disorganized, whereas when we are late, we tend to blame it on extenuating circumstances, such as the traffic. In 1967, the earliest study on the subject was conducted by Edward Jones and Victor Harris in their study, The Attribution of Attitudes. They conducted two experiments. In the first experiment, they had subjects read pro- and anti-Fidel Castro essays and had them rate the author's attitudes towards Castro. They were told that these essays reflected the true views of the authors. In the second experiment, they had another group of subjects do the same, but this time told them that these essays were written for a college debate, and thus did not reflect the true views of the authors. They hypothesized that the average ratings of the pro-Castro authors' attitudes would be significantly more positive than those of the anti-Castro authors in Experiment 1, whereas in Experiment 2, these ratings would not be significantly different. Essentially, they believed that the subjects would use personal attributions in the first experiment and situational attributions in the second experiment. However, the hypothesis was not supported. In both experiments, subjects on average rated the pro-Castro authors' feelings as significantly more positive than the anti-Castro authors. In the end, they concluded that in both cases, the subjects emphasized personal attributions over situational attributions, despite the different frameworks of the experiment. This conclusion formed the basis of the fundamental attribution error. Much of the subsequent research on the fundamental attribution error has been focused on trying to determine how fundamental this error really is. A study conducted by Canadian researcher Takehiko Masuda exposed separate groups of American and Japanese participants to the same animated cartoons. Masuda found that while the Japanese subjects tended to attribute background faces and images to the disposition of the main character, the American subjects explained the main character's disposition primarily based on presumed internal characteristics. This suggests that the fundamental attribution error may be more commonly seen in individualistic rather than collectivist cultures. Research done by Daniel Gilbert, then of the University of Texas, indicates that the FAE can often be explained by the saliency of certain characteristics of a situation, with details relating to disposition often being much more easily accessible than situational details, thus explaining the FAE. Researchers in various fields have also been able to apply the theory to explain things like why people's personalities often change drastically depending on their environment, and why individuals often assume that the lies of others are signs of character flaws, while their own mistruths are often justified and necessary. The FAE has also become particularly commonly applied in economics, educational leadership, and moral philosophy. Studies show that professions and hobbies can influence one's proneness to the FAE. For example, mathematicians and people with coursework and logic are less likely to make this error, because they employ step-by-step reasoning instead of relying on heuristics to reach an answer or decision. Other factors that often lead to the FAE include perceptual and motivational elements. For instance, one may more readily make the error when describing someone who they already perceive in a negative light, and also if there is some payoff to describing the person negatively. Overall, many psychologists agree that the discussion of the FAE is overly simplistic and that it often fails to take into account the complexity of the situations on either end, as well as the conflicting goals that people are simultaneously pursuing. One solution in preventing making the error of the FAE is to emphasize logical, step-by-step reasoning instead of quick decisions. Also, in order to prevent making the error, one can try to avoid pre-existing biases about people or external motivations. These are our sources.